Hello, everybody. My name is Sherry Coutu, and I'm here with Megan Smith and with Reid Hoffman, who's joining us in a hybrid virtual sense, which is quite right, as we are a panel on technology and innovation and worldwide collaboration. So it seems quite right that we're here. But Reid, it's nice to see you. It would be, I wish you were here, but you are here with us in any event. So we have, I've had a wonderful privilege of working with both Megan and Reid over a number of years on innovation and entrepreneurship and how they can be used as your best friend to solve the world's pressing problems. So it seems that, again, continuing this collaboration and bringing some of the thoughts out in the fireside chat today is what we're all on about. We've got a few questions that we've thought would be good to sort of start planting within you. And then we're going to open up to questions in about a half an hour. So hopefully that will be okay. So think up your questions. And again, we'll do the rapid fire again, and then we'll sort of choose which ones to answer. And I hope the hybrid goes okay. Reid, can we just make sure that we can hear your voice?
Absolutely, it's a delight, and as course as another innovator, you used the line that I was planning, which is, this is the very appropriate blending of the new world with the old world as we go hybrid through Zoom.
Absolutely, brilliant. Okay, so our topic is technology and the future of innovation, but with the hybrid of and its role in solving the world's most pressing problems. Particularly with regards to, I would like all of us to leave this room with hope rather than despair or anything else, because our collaboration equips us to solve the world's pressing problems. Not only collaboration, but also technology, which is, again, some of the things that we are going to explore. So I'm going to start with Blitz Scaling, and I want to talk about access and equity. And what I would, and I'm going to start out with Reid on Blitz Scaling. And in entrepreneurship and Blitz Scaling, going big, how did you come up with that? What are your sort of thought processes? I then want to talk about scouting and scaling. And again, that's the sort of conversation, and we'll ping pong back and forth. But I'm going back to that time at the lakeside when we were talking about the title of your book. And it's like, how did you just talk to me about the choice of word? So why don't we start with getting big, how that, and then scale, and then we'll see where we go. So I'm going to start out with you, Reid.
So all of the business books that I've written are all kind of the world as I found it, because I originally was thinking I was going to be an academic. I went to Oxford on the Marshall Scholarship to study philosophy and how do you contribute to the thinking about who we are as individuals in society and who we should be. And then I was like, well, actually, in fact, scale impact is the thing that matters to me, and technology and software scale impact. So I went back to the Valley, which I'd had exposure to, and then started doing, kind of becoming a technologist more then. I was not intrinsically a technologist by then. And Blitz Scaling was the observation that you have this weird phenomena within Silicon Valley, which is, if you round up all of the people, not the technologists, in Silicon Valley, you get to about 3.5 million, which is maybe the population circa, Ireland. And yet half of the NASDAQ, half of the global world tech companies emerges out of this small, kind of cauldron. And why is that? And part of it is the understanding that what happens is speed to scale. That actually, in fact, when you're trying to build the next generation of platforms, the next generation of technology, that speed to scale is essential. And Silicon Valley is a learning network. It isn't just a resources network. It isn't just a, capital and talent and all the rest, but it's also a massive amounts of very quick learning from each other to how to solve these problems. And part of the reason this is relevant is I actually think that any scale problem that you're trying to solve, and it could be, for example, even from the last panel, scale, questions in democracy. Technology is an essential part of the solution. It's a necessary part. You cannot do it without it. And I can literally go through almost anything: criminal justice, democracy, medicine, et cetera, et cetera. And technology is a critical part. And so the patterns by which you do it, a la Blitz Scaling. Now, the reason why to do it is to get people to pay attention to it, because prioritizing speed over efficiency in an environment of uncertainty, which is the definition of Blitz Scaling, is the way that these companies are being built. And so we want them to be built everywhere in the world. And so share that information, share that ability so that everywhere you can have that kind of rise in entrepreneurship. And of course, on the very last part of the general inclusion question that you kind of alluded to, what you have to do, I think, as investors and as entrepreneurs is to build your networks to be diverse as you're beginning this. So it's not something you add in later, but it's something there from the foundation. And so I think it's also another important part of inclusion in the creation of these technology companies in the future. And with that, I will pause.
That's great, Reid. Thank you. And I'm just going to pick up a couple of those points before turning on to Megan. So one of the points is that it's not the idea, it's not the first one, it's the one that gets to scale that wins. And again, we've been collaborating and working also with governments on removing barriers that enable scaling to happen. Now, sometimes that could be laws, and sometimes it can be in the educational system. And within the companies that are seeking to scale, sometimes it has to do with the acquisition of talent, and other times it has to do with the development of the talent that are already there working. So again, I just want to sort of put it, it's multidimensional and it's complex, and the whole society and the stakeholders have to come together in order to gain that economic growth, because with a plethora of barriers, you have to approach all of them as stakeholders, and we alone cannot achieve anything, really. So part of the puzzle is scaling. How do you spot those things that are working? So how do you scout them out? Mm-hmm. And then how do you sort of use innovation to sort of get them big? Just sort of building on what Reid was saying. I love your scout and scale sort of framework.
Yeah, it's wonderful to be with all of you. And one of the things that was unusual for me is to go from Silicon Valley. I'm an engineer by background, mechanical engineer, and I had been in the MIT Media Lab, which Nell comes from also, and then to Japan, and then into Silicon Valley. We worked on the beginning of smartphones. We worked on building Google, worked on the beginning of the internet. I ran a company called Planet Out. And one of the methods of venture capital is not to make companies, but to find talent. And so one of the key methods that I got exposed to was this learning community, and a highly accelerated learning community. And so this idea that there's talent that wants to do its thing. I did the acquisitions of Google Earth, Google Maps. Those people were going to make those maps. John used to stare at the Lord of the Rings maps. He wanted to make maps, Brian and others. And so people are, the talent is within us. Look at the Marshall Scholars right now, our current young ones, if you want to raise your hands. You have passion. You want to do things. And if we support you, that's a Silicon Valley method that I learned. It's actually been around, but maybe thinking more like venture catalyzing. Because you don't always have the money to help, but maybe you have a government, or maybe you have an organization, or maybe you're just a bunch of friends. And so this idea of looking for top talent and helping hear what someone wants to do and then accelerating them. So an example that we did when the Sustainable Development Goals at the UN were being ratified. A colleague of mine was running the non-government liaison service at the UN, sort of the civil society voice. And so we, as sort of our Silicon Valley ways, thought, I wonder who is already solving these 17 goals. And I wonder where they are, what they're doing, what they have that's either promising or a prototype or regional. So now, since we're connected at the speed of light, right, Reid? Could we ask on the internet? And so we sent out an all call for the United Nations Solutions Summit. We said, who's already fixing this stuff? And we had 800 submissions from 131 countries in 3 weeks. And this was not, here's my Post-it note idea. This is, I've already built this thing that takes all the food products from our building and then grinds them up in the basement, and we have soil as a product instead of trucking the waste. Malaysia, right? I already have programs for science education here in Columbia because most of our STEM graduates are leaving for graduate school and not coming home. So we're inspiring youth, and we already have these clubs, Boys Girls Club meets science. I already have the Ghana Bamboo Bicycle Club company where we sequester carbon into our bamboo bikes, and we're solving transportation and jobs, and this is real. So we had all these people, and so we put them on stage 1 hour after the SDGs were ratified. And we did it with kind of like a mini TED Talk. So quick 4 minutes from somebody, and then a table like this where you all would accelerate them, because we, the community, can accelerate each other. So this method of scout for the talent, find out what someone wants to do or their team, who's already fixing, and then help accelerate them in the different forms that venture capital uses, but venture catalyze. So, and try to do that in our major institutions, teach a new practice at the UN. We've done it for 5 years at the UN. We stopped with COVID, but we can resume. So this idea of finding talent, and if you ask in an open, participatory way, that's one of the practices we did not take from Silicon Valley, which is we found a gender balanced, geo-balanced, topic balanced, racially balanced, age balanced set of rock star entrepreneurs from all over the world. And then this bouquet of genius comes forward, and then we can accelerate them. It's the same move as founding the Malala Fund. Malala Yousafzai knows more about how to get girls and all children to education than I do. So if I help her, it's a surface area of solution making. It's sort of this method.
That's brilliant. I just want to pause on entrepreneurship for a second, and then I'm going to go back over to Reid. So from my study of entrepreneurship, you look at, well, what is it? What is entrepreneurship? And I love the definition, the process definition, that an entrepreneur is somebody who uses resources that are not theirs. They leverage resources that are not there to solve problems that matter to them. And on that definition, everybody in this room is an entrepreneur,
Yes.
Which is truly excellent, because I want all of us in here continuing our good work on solving the world's problems. So, Reid, one of the most enjoyable things, in our past is you've got a problem, it's big, it's bad. You cannot solve it on a global basis without technology and without bringing a network together. Can you talk a little bit about how you use networks, or you recommend and you've seen networks work to bring about Blitz Scaling to solve the problem? So you can only get big if you've got a platform. How do you spot it? And then what are some of the things that you do at Greylock and some of the other things that you do with some of your other initiatives to get that lovely kernel of an idea, that genius idea, to something that really is at scale? What's your secret sauce?
If only it were easy. But one of the things I think that is a corollary to the entrepreneurship definition you gave, which is excellent, is that also entrepreneurs' plans for what they're trying to solve outstrip their current resources, because you have to essentially acquire those resources as you're working to solve the problem, scout and scale, and then also get to scale. Yeah. And part of networks is you're looking for all kinds of different resources, because in addition to obviously having an engineering mindset, how do you solve the problem, bringing various members of the community into that, you also need to kind of figure out, okay, so where is it go to market? Where is it product market fit? Where is it scale product market fit? Where is it financial capital? Where is it the adjustments in the constant iteration? Innovation has both large and small jumps in innovation, and the networks help with all of that. And so part of what you're looking to do is to build those networks very systemically in order to do it. So part of what you have happen within Silicon Valley, and I think other places can do this, a little bit like Megan was saying, venture catalyzing, is to build kind of networks that are persistent. Megan is one of the really excellent people at this herself, going, oh, you're trying to solve this problem, here's someone who can help you, here, you guys can collaborate on this. And those network nodes are part of what you do. And when you're building these companies, that's part of what you're doing when you're bringing talent in, when you're building a board, when you're building relationships, when you're solving certain kinds of problems. And that network building is essential to part of the reason why the earlier thing I was mentioning about why Silicon Valley creates such large global tech companies. And I think that's obviously doable everywhere. And part of this modern hybrid world we're in is it's even more doable everywhere, which is part of the kind of the tangible demonstration that we have with today's kind of micro hybrid panel.
When you talk about networks, and I know that you've written an absolutely beautiful piece on friendship recently, and again, how it helps you solve problems. Again, I've been you look at the US, it's like, well, let's go have a coffee. Well, having a coffee doesn't mean I'd like you to invest 100 million in my company. It's I got something on my mind and I can't figure out, and I think you might understand it. Can you talk about that? Because I love that is, the problem solving. You can solve a tiny bit of a problem with having a lot of coffees. And you started that blog with, you emailed 300 people to say, I got this idea, let's talk about it. So talk a little bit about how we may not realize that we have all the leverage, not all, we have some of the leverage that we need in order to solve those problems. And if we share that problem, whoever we've shared it with might be able to take us to another degree of separation. Again, it almost goes back to the thesis that you had when you were setting up LinkedIn as a way of equipping people to leverage their resources and others.
Yep, and to be able to discover in the LinkedIn case, not only is the network the people you know, but the surprising exponential folks of the folks they know, which can help you find the right person to tell you what to improve in your idea. And so part of this, one thing on a transatlantic basis is to always have, kind of do not be apologetic about ambition. Like you have a big idea and go and ask people about it. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to be arrogant, but it's you're trying to figure out how to solve this big problem. The next thing is when you're talking to people and asking them who else is the best people to talk to and who are the things, don't try to hide the idea. Don't think the idea is your secret sauce. It's the fact you're in motion, that you're actually building, that you're aggregating the network, that you're making things happen. And that learning curve and that speed. So literally anybody who could possibly give you a valuable commentary is worth talking to. And then the very last one is ask the question, what could I improve with the idea? What's wrong with it? Don't ask, what do you like the idea? Because most people think, oh, you want social reassurance, right? And it's like, no, you want to say, what can I improve? And that's, I think, part of that learning path.
Great.
The thing that Reed was just talking about is something we do when we do the solution summit, we do things is that when the table comes together, the coaching we give is 2/3 yes and 1/3 yes but. Which means, if you're doing improv with someone and you start saying no, it stops the flow, right? So if you're trying to help an entrepreneur and an innovator, somebody within their organization outside, what is the yes and? What can you think of? What kind of partners, what kind of technologies, what kind of board members, what kind of just ideas that might help in all the dimensions? I call it sort of play the whole orchestra on the hardest problems. What are all the dimensions there? And then to Reed's point, everyone needs some critique. So don't shut down the idea, but maybe it needs a pivot. Maybe there's some question that's really essential that's not answered yet, and there's some exploration there still. So sort of 1/3 yes, but. And as you help each other, kind of thinking in this framework really matters.
Yeah, I look at that as the good and the bad and the ugly. So I like sort of saying, I've got this idea, and it's like, okay, and it can be scary to give people negative feedback because you don't want to, again, it's scary to you as well, and it's even scarier to ask for it, as we say. So if we think about the framework of, I like that, the good part of that is this, the bad part of this is, and then actually, if you see an ugly bit, and this is the ugly bit, there may be a fatal flaw. There's nothing better than a fatal flaw to get together with people to solve, because you'll find that you solve it a lot sooner than denying that it might exist. But it's also about vulnerability, or sometimes it feels like you're being vulnerable, but actually you're being ambitious. And we should make no apologies for being ambitious and to say, we don't have all of those solutions, but we've got a problem and we've got a good reason to want to solve that problem. Can you talk a little bit about one of the problems we have is diversity. So can we talk about why is it good to get diverse voices to solve a problem? And sometimes we again, when we started out, it was about mindset. I mean, we were trying to get the Silicon Valley mindset to come over here because the people were too frightened to talk about, what their ambition. Oh my God. And it might fail. But what are the positive advantages that give you leverage if you have diverse voices, mindset, perspectives, place, gender, color. Just talk a little bit about, I mean, there's probably an elephant in the room, but why don't we talk about it? Because we won't solve the world's problems without tapping that talent.
I think there's several different parts of this. One of them that matters a lot is the data. So the Glassdoor team recently put together a bunch of the research that's happened about diversity, equity, inclusion. And just the facts are, if you have a diverse team, a broad team, you get more revenue, you get more creativity, you get more productivity, you get more efficiency. It's just proven. Now, why don't we do that? Because we have long history of biases. Like one of the ones that I often, if we were projecting, I'd show you a graphic, and the graphic shows 2,000 films. If we were to watch 2,000 most popular films, and who gets to talk? And it's divided by gender. And so there's this huge blue graphic of, and you can click the points and see the movies, from sort of 30% to 100%. And then this tiny red area, and this is men and this is women. Now that's true of every statue, street sign, so who's getting venture money. It's just, we are very biased, and you can look, it's worse by race. And what we see is, if you look at that same graphic for children's TV, it's the same. And so when we all grow up, it's like none of us created the problem we're facing, but we see it. So what are we going to do about it together is a really urgent part. So we don't have to blame ourselves. We do have to get going for many reasons. One is because everything will be better if we do this, but another is it's super unfair. And I actually brought a children's book up. This is one of my favorite books. Who knows who this is? Ada Lovelace. Anybody? How many people know who Ada Lovelace is? Okay. How many people know who Darwin is? Okay. They were at the same time. Within the same decade, Darwin discovered and spoke of our past. A few blocks from here. And a few blocks from here lived Ada Lovelace. And Ada is Lord Byron's poet math's daughter. Poet of code, like Joy Buell and Winnie. She, like the Wright brothers, loved light. She invented all kinds of things. And when she was younger, she met Charles Babbage. So think about the first industrial age. The first industrial age had Dickens and Darwin and all these different people. Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. Should we raise the monster or not? That sounds like AI to me, right? And she's with Ada's father when she writes that book. So Babbage is the person who does the first mechanical computer. And Ada's with them, and guess what Ada does? She's the first person in the history of humanity to invent and write an algorithm. She says, I think we can figure out the math of the cerebrum, like we thought of the math of astronomy and the sidereal. I wish to bequeath to the generations a calculus of the nervous system. So if we don't know that Ada invented algorithms, then we don't think women belong in tech, right? If we don't know that the Duchess of Cambridge's grandmother and great aunt were code breakers at Bletchley Park, where we cracked the Enigma codes to listen to the Nazis and save 11 million lives, shorten the war by 2 years. 2/3 women. Reed and I and Sherry have all been to Bletchley. I encourage you to go there. But if most people here, even in England, don't know that the Duchess of Cambridge's great aunt and grandmother are heroes, coding mathematical heroes, then we don't know
I was speaking to last night, but anyway, and he was saying, I didn't used to be convinced about AI. In fact, I thought it was worse to use it than to use it, but I've recently become convinced. Sorry, Reid. Hello. Good to have you back. I was just about to go over and talk to you about as a venture capitalist. Talk a little bit about your view on diversity, talking to some of the elephants in the room, and then I'd love you to start us off on AI, good or bad, and our friend or something we should fear.
So first, on diversity, super important. Just all the things that Megan was saying. I think that it's the fact that we have all of this amazing talent that we are under deploying in combination is simply, tragic. And so it is, I think, very proven that you can have all of this talent to do really amazing things. And part of it is, the patterns is not just the media things. So for example, on my podcast, Masters of Scale, we're 50-50 gender, just to demonstrate all of the amazing talent. And we've done that very successfully, 6-7 years as ways of doing that. And also what you need to do, I think, as investors and entrepreneurs is build your networks early. So for example, part of the stuff that we're doing at Greylock is we're working with various organizations such as Management Leaders of Tomorrow and so forth to make sure that not just in gender, but also in kind of racial diversity, you get that amazing talent, which then gives you an edge in order to make stuff. And I think that's the important thing. And we clearly have a structural issues that we need to solve. And when you're looking at those, you go, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So make sure you're doing something. And that's, I think, on the diversity side. Now, on the AI side, when people say, what is the technology that most excites you and the most concerns you, usually they're the same answer because they have the greatest possibility for doing this. And artificial intelligence, I think, is one of them. I think we have line of sight in the next 3 to 10 years about what's going on in terms of transformation of industries and what's happening there. And I think that the question is, I think it's very easy to actually, in fact, be concerned about it, but it's also where the great possibilities are, and it's those amplifiers. So, for example, in the last month, OpenAI, which I'm on the board of, released a product called Dolly to limited release, and then will be growing, which creates visuals, new pictures and visuals based entirely on a text stream, which then is giving everybody the superpower to be essentially a visual designer, to think visually, do this. And you say, well, is that going to take graphic designers? Is that going to make them not have, as much work? It's like, well, it transforms the work. It amplifies. It's an amplifier for everyone. They will themselves still be amazing, now even more amazing. And I think that's part of what we are going to see as what's possible from AI. So like my example in my earlier comment about thinking about how does technology solve every problem? You say, well, we want to solve medicine, globally. Well, part of what AI is already doing already today, your cell phone camera can take a picture of a skin lesion and give you a partial, kind of skin cancer diagnosis. You make that all, and that's an AI technique. It's a vision technique. You make that all available throughout the entire world, and you have a much broader scale solution as one microcosm within medicine. So I am ultimately deeply optimistic about this stuff. Doesn't mean you don't have to work on it. You don't have to chart it. You don't have to solve some of the potential side effects that come along with it, just like you had to do with cars and everything else, but enormously optimistic.
Fantastic. And again, in the area of medicine, which you raised, I've been really excited by some of the things, even cancer research, and again, the ability to use technology to sort of bash away at that. I also, I remember 10 or 15 years ago when Al Gore was talking about the climate crisis and the view at the time was that the technology did not exist to solve that crisis. Now, a couple of weeks ago, there is now agreement that the technology is absolutely there to solve the problem. We've scouted it out. We know that the problem is solvable from a technological point of view. The issue is currently with the geopolitical instability and these sorts of things. And so that's health, that's crisis, again, skills. So talk a little bit about precision medicine. I know you did quite a lot of stuff when you were in and then huge data sets.
Yeah, so I think to this topic, what's exciting is that AI, quantum, all these things, the fields are moving. Technology in its greatest form, and it's a little echoey in here, okay? Technology in its greatest form is actually about love. And I would call that in 3 directions. One, obsessive curiosity about how it works. Like, how's the universe? What is this? We go discover science, like all that drives us, right? The second is really in the form of kind of ingenuity, engineering, service, making things from bridges to what we might do with nano. And the third is community. And really a community that's quite accepting and open is when it's in its best form. And so I love the internet. All this amazing stuff happens on it. I also worry about it. But this is a post from Bernice King, who is Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King's youngest. And she put up this form, which beloved community is one of King's thing. And it made me think about Marshall. And it made me think about what he would do right now in the same form as his speech, right? So his speech about really the crisis from the war, so food, hunger, these things, but also the talent of Europe and how to show up. It takes $1 to catch $1, as we know from Professor Eunice and the microloans. Show up on behalf of the talent in Europe at the time and help rebuild infrastructure and investment in people. And this is an interesting quote. It says, true compassion, this is from King, true compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It comes to see that the edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. And so the systemic challenges that we have surfaced because of our global pandemic challenges, that we have surfaced as we see ambient bias, who gets to be in the painting and who's not in the painting, as we see sort of the talent of each other is really the opportunity. And so when I think of technologies, I think about how do we use these just like we would use arts, just like we would use policy, just like we would use language, all of, again, the whole orchestra on the hardest problems. And what's interesting is, Tom, like in the panel that you had this morning, we had extraordinary products like Reddit and Airbnb, awesome, right? And we had some of the people, our policy teammates. And when I went to go work for President Obama, I was the United States Chief Technology Officer. And so I noticed that when I was in tech, the engineers and product managers were in charge. And then the comms and policy people were at the bottom. And then when I went to government, it went like this. And then the policy and comms people were in charge. Everybody was awesome. And then the tech people weren't even invited. So we tried to stop being the help outside in the government contract land and have live at least one of us in the room and get this flatten out capability so that we could have all of our different teammates working together. Like, why should we know where every Amazon package is and we don't know where the kids on the border went? This is crazy. And it's just because the humans who work at Amazon and the humans who work on this other are both awesome, but they're not working with each other across that. And so I think about the opportunity for everyone, like government, it's just who shows up. So if you happen to be a techie, please show up. If you happen to be an artist, please show up. If you are a policymaker, if you are an operator, please show up and make these governments hum. And so civic tech, philanthropic tech, are the things that I'm most excited about for AI, for quantum, for medical things. And so it's both precision medicine. If I go to Health and Human Services, $1 trillion US agency, or the NIH, and then we go talk about precision medicine, everybody's like, okay, let's start the meeting. And if I go down the virtual hall to foster care, human services, people might say, my computer's working, why are you guys here? Right? So let's change that up. So it's sort of the exciting thing about innovation really is, can we create more welcome, get rid of that third grade experience where someone's like, some people are good at math and some people are not. Like, everybody's good at math. It's just how you're taught. So let's go forward and figure out how to solve things. And that's what I'm most excited about for AI. And I also think the things that are most dangerous about AI get solved by more of us at the table, because we're crawling really biased data that then is going to automate and start deciding who gets jobs and who gets loans and who gets to go to school and all this stuff. And it's going to be the same lopsided world if we don't proactively make sure the data sets are more balanced.
So I think you bring a really important points of view again. So if you're in government years, you've got policy, but again, an absence of sort of understanding that. And if you're in tech, you've got a lack of understanding of policy. And that's something that both you and Reid have spent a lot of time and effort in. And so those perspectives of we need everybody in the room in order to see it from all of the different diverse perspectives that it is in so that we can make progress. You mentioned the word curiosity and you reminded me of your old call sign used to be quixotic again, Reid. So talk about that curiosity and collaboration and then get ready for questions and then we'll open up for questions. But how much of a friend is curiosity for our world, for the world that we want to co-create together? Because we won't be able to create it on our own.
Well, I think I'm only adding to the excellent way that Megan put this, which is that love of kind of how do you make a better world, what is possible, and what you might discover in doing it is, I actually think, the fundamental, kind of root for Techne, for, kind of what we can be doing with technology. And I think that that question about thinking about the way the world could be, the way the world could be better, the things that could be done, where we take agency into our hands in order to do that. I mean, the climate change crisis being one of the very large ones. And I think that the questions around technology, anything from, kind of carbon capture, green energy, geoengineering, all of these things, I think are part of what are the things we could do that could make this a lot better? And I think that sense of curiosity and that sense of wonder and that sense of love of a better world, a better humanity, a better set of solutions to our challenges is, I think, is fundamental to the path that we try to, the path that we try to walk.
Yeah, and the path that we walk involves government, it involves educational institutions, it involves companies, people who work at small companies. Again, earlier is like, who could fault loving a small company? Of course, but small companies also that become large. Thomas, you were last night, we're talking about, again, the Ukraine, and that is one of our most pressing problems. I do think that as a pressing problem will partially be solved by technology. And again, I'm just sort of curious about that before we open up for questions. How will it? Well, I think we'll pose it to these guys. In the climate crisis, technology works. In the crisis of precision medicine and medicine, technology, your friend, will help. Do you think that in this war, in this Ukrainian issue that we've got at the moment, in this crisis, do you think technology is and can be our friend, more of our friend, and AI more of our friend, or not? Is it part of the solution?
It's both. So, which we're experiencing. So on the downside, one of the repercussions of the APIs or the opening of Facebook that we have all experienced, where the data was sucked out and then brought into Cambridge Analytica and other things, and then used back at us for advertising strange points of view that might or might not be true. This ability to use misinformation based on kind of ad targeting us. So, if you click, I think it's 4 or 5 different sort of clicks that tell me where you are on a particular issue, and I can come at you through the screen and tell you all kinds of lies. And you are not defenseless against that. But once we get into these echo chambers, it's pretty hard. And certainly we're seeing that with the Russian people. We're seeing that in the United States. We saw that with Brexit, whichever side you're on, people are telling messages and people are separated and they're not talking to each other. Right. So we have a huge problem with misinformation and figuring that out. Taking all these services down is probably not the answer and not likely to happen. So what is it that we can do to help each other in these times? It's not a new problem. The Nazis used this stuff all the way through human history. People have used this stuff. It's just in our time, it's in these modern tools. So, we worked on the beginning of smartphones. We're working on business models to make you sit here staring at this thing, but people have developed that. So what can we do, to reduce the bullying, to reduce all those things? So those are very important. And then this other side of this is we really are connected at the speed of light in most cases. So talented people in Ukraine are teaming with each other, are teaming with us to try to fight back in a form of using these tools, the network, for technology, for solution making, for trying to get to peace. So there's specific things there. There's certainly war technologies which are unfortunate and being used, but there's also peace technologies that are being used and capabilities there. I also think gender balance is very important. And so can we use these tools for more gender balance, more racial balance, more other balance, so we can get to a more peaceful society? Reid.
So, and Reid, I know that you're involved in some of these very large companies about using tech for good rather than bad. Can you just comment a little bit on how tech can be better used and how we can bear that responsibility that we have as technologists who understand technology to make sure that it's not used inappropriately for means that we don't agree with as citizens and as a society?
Well, I mean, technology always has some possibility of misuse. I mean, as Megan was saying, obviously the Nazi war machine used radio and movies and a bunch of other things to, very detrimental effect. It's always possible. And even though we get familiar with, like, for example, cars, cars are, potentially also weapons and can be used in, ways where, we've had crazy people in the US use them as kind of hate crime weapons. And so the question is not to think about just purely the technology. And yes, we try to make it so the technology itself has the rails, but how do we deploy it? How do we use it? How do we integrate it? So you say, well, we have misinformation problems with media technology, social media, but also, of course, by the way, local radio, cable news, et cetera. Well, how do we use technology to be part of the solution? Because part of the thing is not just that, well, we should roll back to our golden 1980s and take this internet thing away. That actually, in fact, is a much less valuable universe than saying, okay, well, we have this additional problem with how this medium's being used. It's being used by potentially hostile actors, also has some incentives around clickbait and everything else. How do we shift it so that it's much better than it used to be? And that's part of where the technology, can be the solution. Now, this encounters getting to some tricky issues, like, for example, what is misinformation? What is transparency and availability to see that in various ways? I think is a non-trivial issue, but I think is a problem that is solvable. And so that's or at least solvable enough, which is usually the technology thing. And so I'm ultimately very optimistic about this. Now, for example, on the flip side of the information technology, it makes it much harder for folks like, the kind of the Russian war machine to completely hide what's going on in the Ukraine from its own people because of this shift of information and flow, like seeing pictures of tragedy, pictures of just, kind of heart-wrenching, the human cost for this kind of thing, and setting against it the kind of lies that this is an anti-Nazi, kind of Russian war machine and that kind of thing, as ways of doing it, is also the flip side of even the current technology doing some good things in this.
Yep. And again, I think back to your Marshall Scholarship. You're doing philosophy at Oxford, and again, full turn now to being an incredible technologist, but also a philosopher. And again, a technologist almost turned philosopher. So again, what I love is our pathways allow us to solve problems together. So we got time for a couple of questions. So if you can quickly ask them, and then we'll take 3 or 4 because we're pressed for time, and then we'll try to make sure that they get answered. So we'll start with you at the back, and then we'll come over here and then go here.
Great, thanks so much. Actually, I'll pick up right where you left us there. So my name is Zach Kaufman. I'm a 2010 Marshall Scholar, and Reid, also an academic turned entrepreneur, working in the technology for impact measurement space. And my question is wondering if you have any words of wisdom around the art of the pivot. We've been hearing a lot today about folks who have gone through professional pivots and kind of changes in their life. Obviously, you guys get to see companies making big pivots and those challenges. In my case, we've built a software company that's grown to 100 folks and see a big new opportunity on the horizon. But do we have to go all in at that and risk what we've built so far?
Okay, you got to be quick and pithy.
Oh,
okay,
sorry, that was it. Yeah, just any words of wisdom.
That's great. Okay, and we're going to take a few more questions and then come back and kind of combine them. Tom.
Reid, very quick. If in 2008 you picked up the New York Times and you saw the headline said that Steve Jobs had disappeared, you'd say, holy mackerel, Steve Jobs has disappeared. Well, 2 years ago, you could have picked up the New York Times that said Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba,
Yeah.
has disappeared.
Yeah.
What impact are you seeing through LinkedIn, through Microsoft, on the Chinese tech and innovation industry as a result of the Steve Jobs of China in some ways disappearing?
Right.
Okay, we'll come back on that. Great question. And you're right here, just next to. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for your remarks. My question was about how technology can show up for democracy, particularly American democracy. Perhaps I'm ignorant, but I'm just curious, where is the de-radicalization software? Where's the targeted depolarization ads on social media? Where's the new innovation proposal for mobile voting? If those solutions are not coming out of Silicon Valley, why do you think that is? And if they are, then how can the general public be better informed about this and support these really critical ventures? Thank you.
Okay, one final question, and then we'll fill them. Thank you.
Dan Jurgen, a question for both Reed and Megan. How should we think about the standoff between Congress and politicians and big tech? Where does virtue lie?
Brilliant. Okay, I think why don't you get started? And again, remember, we've got not
What's your
too
name?
much time. Dan.
My name is Gabby.
Gabby, okay. So what I found when I worked in Silicon Valley is there were a lot of my teammates who were trying to address things that wasn't prioritizing those features. So I don't are underfunded. They're under noticed and they're under accelerated. So one of the things I think is how do we structure more to find those solution makers, whether they have just a burst insight or something that's actually working. It's easier to start with a prototype than to have to do blank slate, but you can also go blank slate. But these are the greatest problems of humanity. And getting this stuff built into the system, you know, what can we do in our school systems to actually work on social capabilities of our young people so that we don't generate bullies? These kinds of problems, you know, can be part of curriculums. They can be part of technologies. They can be part of the way we think about things, respect for each other. And so I think this is probably one of the most central questions on the table. Because how do we accelerate that? Because it starts solving lots of others. So just known.
Okay, we're gonna keep on going because I
Yes.
think we're gonna get Mel's gonna get some comment on that, and then maybe go to the pivot or the Chinese tech Steve Jobs question.
Well,
Congress.
I will do them very quickly, although obviously all of them could be elaborated. So one, actually, I think as far as I can tell, even though the Jack Ma disappearance, I think there's so much opportunity still that entrepreneurs are still going very full hog, you know, kind of really, really going in China. It's an extremely vibrant market. Second thing, to Dan's question is, you know, the whole question is, what's your theory about how we're going to build technology that solves these problems? And I think that the unfortunate thing that's happening on the Hill is more politics around fighting, you know, partisan battles versus the how do we solve these problems? And so that's part of where you get this kind of crosswise. That doesn't mean that large tech companies aren't, you know, don't have challenges and don't need to do things that have a better impact on society. But the question is not political referendum. The question is, how do we solve these problems? Then on pivot, the real question is if you try to do two things, why isn't it just likely that you fail at both? So one of the real questions you have, but the all-in question is, do you really think you can do both? Or do you actually need, is it a bigger risk to try to do both versus one? And you have to do the specific analysis. And then, you know, I myself have been in investing in a whole bunch of tech stuff for, you know, kind of democracy. It's a challenging problem. And ultimately, I think you need to have scale tech companies that are working on it in the right way, because yes, always with startups, you know, venture capitalist, entrepreneur, but I think actually the ecosystem needs to go through it. And it's one of the things where I think where people frequently have this illusion, they go, well, actually, would 10 Facebooks versus one Facebook make the problem better or worse? And the answer, I think, is worse, as long as on the one Facebook, you're investing in the right things.
So
Thank you.
quick pivot thing. So Flickr was a game company until it started playing around with photos. Google Earth was a middleware gaming thing that had a little app of looking at the Earth. Twitter was originally a like podcast thing, and then Jack Dorsey had done taxi dispatch software, and so they started playing around with messaging each other. So like a lot of times what you see, just go there. You can come back to the other thing later. I tend to think, and to Reed's point, doing two things at once is really hard. So I am very worried about Jack. And I thank you for bringing that up. And I don't know the answer there, but we should all be very worried about him. And try to see if we could find him. Congress. So there's this group called Tech Congress, and not that tech is somehow the big thing, but just adding teammates who speak that language. So you wouldn't go to a meeting to negotiate in another language and not bring your own translator. And so a lot of times governments and philanthropies and others don't have a very senior, fully fluent person who speaks that language. We call it Klingon. So they're not speaking that. And so you're relying on the other side's translator. And so they could sell you whatever. And so I really think the more, if we have this bias of one group's good at math, one group's not, and so one group goes to Congress and we barely any tech people in Congress. So we have to work on that. But right now we can't work on it. Instead, you have 2 in a box, or 3 of us, or 4. Just get people who speak these languages, especially on these much harder problems. It's actually relatively easy to drive a car down the street by itself compared to working on some of these other social or environmental issues. And so that really matters, to have people leave their tech commercial thing and go serve their country or their state or city or tribe or and then go back and do that, just like our colleagues in law do, our colleagues in that. And that's, I think, part of the answer to help with certainly technical things, because then the fluency is there.
Great. So in our world of troubled times, Reed and Megan, thank you very much. I think that I loved last night talking about Marshall brought us together at that time to solve the world's greatest problems. There are still quite a lot of really troublesome problems around, and we all think, and hopefully we put a case to show you that tech is part of the answer, and that you're not truly only a technologist and only an academic or only an entrepreneur or only a politician or a government. We all solve this together, and we put different hats on at different times. There are some problems that we need to solve together. I hope that this bringing together people now, and now thank you very much, will result in a lot of collaborations and move the needle. So thank you, and it's been enjoyable.